if he just addresses it once, then it's pretty much over.
Albert, good morning. Courtney Cronin's in for Hoodie. We want to talk football with you. We're going to start with Aaron Rodgers. You heard the audio over the weekend where a little girl asked him about playing for the Bears. And he said, I love Chicago, but it's a one-way relationship, all one way. And then he took another shot when a guy asked him about the Bears and retirement, where he said something to the effect of, every year the Bears are going to be a big surprise team because they got the new coach and they got this and they got that. I think it's a done deal that he's coming to the Steelers, and I love it. What about you?
Yeah, the Steelers are certainly expecting him. And I think the next couple of weeks will be interesting. But I think the last couple of months have sort of been marked by, by what his last couple of years were like, and that, look, he's got this personal thing he's dealing with right now. He's been traveling a bunch. And I do think, like, the way things went down in June have affected the way that he's handling this year. And that, and we've been over this, right, Cap? He could have signed April 1st, and they could have said, okay, that's done now. You go take care of all your personal stuff and just come back to us when you're ready. And if they do that, fine. But I think one of the problems with that is, and we've been over this, is that it invites all the questions. You start the off-season program. You start OTAs. Where's Aaron? Where's Aaron? Where's Aaron? God forbid he doesn't show up for minicamp, and so by doing it this way, there is some risk on the Steelers side, of course, that he changes his mind, but you're not inviting all of that stuff. And I do think part of this is Aaron himself, too, going through what he went through last year. I mean, you guys remember what happened with the minicamp in Egypt and all of that last year. I don't think Aaron wanted to go through that again, where it was going to be like, where in the world is Aaron Rodgers, because he isn't in Pittsburgh. So I think for both him and the Steelers, it just sort of turned out that this was the easiest way to handle it, and it's you go take care of everything you need to take care of, and when you're ready to go and you're ready to be all in, you come and you sign a contract, and we're going. That said, I do think the mini camp in 2 weeks is a pretty significant checkpoint coming up, and my feeling is that the Steelers would probably want him in before then.
Why does it feel like they're bending their own set of rules, their own set of standards for him, when Kirk Cousins is somebody who they'd probably be paying about the same amount for via trade, 6th-round pick, picking up some of the guarantees, all of that, and a consistent quarterback who's younger? Why have they thrown all logic based on how they've created their organization out the window when it comes to Rodgers?
Courtney, because I think this is their big swing. I think that they're and look, this is something I've really felt this way for the last year. They're in a really weird spot, where they've got a handful of players that are very much in win now, that territory. T.J. Watt's going to be 31. Minkah Fitzpatrick's going to be 29. Cam Hayward's obviously on the back end of his career. They trade for DK Metcalf, who's now on his 3rd contract. That's a team, from a roster standpoint. Now, they're younger in other spots. They've got a promising young offensive line, of course. And, so it's not everywhere. But, if you look at the core of the team, it really is a bunch of guys who are in it to win it right now. So, I think they were always sort of in that position where it was where do we take our big swing? Now, I think, the Matthew Stafford thing was something that they investigated, and that would have qualified as a very big swing. And this certainly qualifies as a very big swing, too. I think the idea is if you connect. If you get the Aaron Rodgers that played against Jacksonville in January, and anybody can go back and look at that game, might have been the end of December, right in there at the end of the year, where it looked like the old Aaron Rodgers. If you get that player for 17 games, that's a big if, but if you get that player for 17 games, well, then all of a sudden now, T.J. Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick and Cam Hayward, they're not just playing for a playoff team, they're playing for a Super Bowl contender. Can you say the same thing about Kirk Cousins? I think that's the question, right? If we take a swing here on Rodgers, maybe there's less of a chance that we'll hit a double as there would be with Kirk Cousins, but there's a better chance that we hit a home run.
In terms of Caleb Williams, we've also been having this discussion. He hasn't spoken yet here. since the Seth Wickersham article dropped that he and his dad investigated going to Minnesota and getting past the CBA, all this other stuff. Fans do not care. I just ran a poll, got almost 4,000 votes. 83% of fans went, non-story, don't care. I'm the same way. I don't need to hear about it. And in fact, if they asked him about it, he should go, I'm on to 2025. You want to talk about 25? I'll stay all day. You want to go back to last year? I'm leaving. Do you think he needs to address it?
Yeah, I think it would be easier if he did, to be honest, because I think for everyone, if he addresses it, then it's a story for one day and it's done, you know? Whereas, like, and if he has, like, a good, like, coherent, like, which I think, like, in, like, Kap, you've heard me say this, like, I think, like, his class, like, that draft class, like, was, so, like, the guys who are 3 and out, like, so that was, like, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Marvin Harrison. Those guys were the first, like, sort of NIL babies, right? Like, they were the first kids to come from high school into the NIL era in college. And so all those guys are a little bit more business-minded. And you can see it in the way Marvin Harrison handled his pre-draft process. It was very different than we've seen from a lot of other players over the years. And, like, I think Caleb's handling of, you know, everything he did before the draft and investigating all these different things is right along those lines. It's like these guys at an earlier age now view themselves as like individual businesses, you know? And so, you know, I think if he had an explanation that was like that, you know what I mean? Like, I think people would understand it, and it'd be a pretty easy thing to kind of check a box with, and where you could just say, hey, like, this is the way that I saw it when I was 19, 20, and 21 years old, and me and my dad were investigating everything. And, yeah, the history of quarterbacks in Chicago wasn't good. And, yeah, at the time there was a defensive head coach there. But a lot's changed now. And I'm happy here, and I want to be the person who changes that narrative. The story's over, right?
I guess. Again, Courtney had brought
up. But I'm just saying, if you just address it, like if you don't say anything, it kind of opens a new can of worms, doesn't it? It's like, well, why doesn't he want to address it? Is there more to the story? It invites more people. Like, I don't know. Like, I view it as, like, if he just addresses it once, then it's pretty much over. You know, instead, it just kind of lingers out there. And I know fans don't care, right? Like, but, like, I do think, like, there is some merit to the idea of him just addressing it once and for all, and that's that. And then everybody can move on, he and Ben Johnson and everybody else. And by the way, like, you know, I have something going up on the site today. Like, he and Ben are off to a really good start, you know, like, so, like, I think the idea that you could kind of explain this once and for all and then just kind of move on with the Ben Johnson era, I think would make some sense. But that's just me talking.
So last week there was owners meetings up in Minnesota, and we know about the tush push. It's going to stay, and of course flag football and all of the big headlines. But something that's starting to get a little bit more buzz is what Roger Goodell said about the salary cap. And there's this discussion that's going to come up about the integrity of the cap system. What do you expect to come out of that? Because we know about void years. Some teams use them more than others. It's about 85% cash over cap right now. And some of the more cash-rich owners being able to manipulate the salary cap to sign players. Is this going to be something that actually catches legs and we might see changes to the system?
It reminds me a little bit of like the couple years before the lockout in 11, like where you started to hear like the little like whispers, and then they became louder and they became louder of like, this isn't working for us anymore. And I mean, I understand like all the fans out there, this is going to fall on deaf ears for sure. You know, like, wait a minute, these owners get like, they clear $150 million before they lift a finger and do anything for themselves. Like, get lost. But this is the sort of conversations they have, you know? And, you know, like a lot of times this can be their way of sort of setting the narrative and setting an early tone for negotiations. And they're years out from another set of CBA negotiations. And they're going to, you know, there's going to be a new set of broadcast deals before there, and potentially the negotiation over 18 games before then. But yeah, I mean, I think the argument the owners would always make is like, there's a certain amount of money that like we make that is sort of just because it's football, right? And that's always been there. Like that's always been the thing. Like there's this amount of money that we make this just because of football. And then there are some things where we're legitimately investing our own money into things, and we deserve a bigger that, which is how the agreement came about in 11, where it's just like, okay, the broadcast money, that's fair. You take this chunk of the broadcast money. We'll take this chunk of the broadcast money. And then the money where we're growing the game and we're investing our own money, we get a bigger chunk of that. Like, it does sort of sound a little bit like, are they doubling back here and saying, well, now we're geniuses with the way we're structuring the broadcast deal, so we deserve a little bit more of that, maybe. I think it's also like just the cap going up as much as it is. And, any business owner seeing that amount of cash, go out the door, I mean, look, these guys didn't get rich by being generous. You know what I mean? So there's certainly, I'm sure some feel like, if my son has a private jet of his own, how do I get my daughter one too now? You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that certainly exists.
All right, you said you have something coming up on the site on Caleb and Ben. Can you let us in on it?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because Ben has been, I think, very constructively critical of Caleb. And every indication I've gotten is that Caleb has been very receptive to it. Caleb's been a constant presence in the building, so that's a good thing. But I think as much as anything else, and this isn't a giant story to note in my Monday column, which is running Tuesday because of the holiday this week. But it's sort of some of the things that they've been working on, some of the things on, and to me, the most interesting part about it, Cap, was there's some big picture leadership stuff, like how you carry yourself as a franchise quarterback, that I think will resonate with some people. They watched a lot of Detroit tape, obviously, to get him ready to play in Ben's offense. They watched a lot of Matthew Stafford tape to work on to help him work mechanically. So there's a lot of little details that they've been kind of honing in on, ahead of actually being able to go out there and practice football, which obviously starts with OTAs.
Who are we not talking about enough right now? Because I know it's the quiet part of the offseason, and I'm curious just how you approach this offseason and what we know coming out of OTAs, minicamp. A lot of teams are starting this week. Is there one team that's going to be maybe I don't know, maybe we can project it out a couple of months to the point of the offseason where things really get going? What are we not talking about enough right now? Because it just feels like there is something bigger lingering.
There's one team that I think has a chance to be really, really good if it hits on a couple things, and that no one's talking about, and that's Houston. And I know they won their division last year, but there was this perception that they kind of took a step back. They fired their offensive coordinator. They bring in Nick Caley from the Rams, and they trade Laramie Tunsil, and they go and they sort of stock their offensive line in different ways, right? They didn't overinvest in left tackle, but they threw a lot of darts at the dartboard. And, my understanding is kind of what they felt was the problem last year. They felt like they've got the culture they need on defense. That's a top 5 defense that's really young, that has a couple of real superstars in the making, and Will Anderson and Derek Stingley. And so how do you get there offensively? And what's so interesting about it to me, Courtney, is okay, you've got a defense that you think is there. You're trying to change the culture offensively, which is part of why you trade Laramie Tunsil. You're getting younger at receiver, and you're bringing in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel from Iowa State. Both those guys you drafted in the top, I think it was top 120 or so. Now it's you have this top 5 defense, and you've got C.J. Stroud to work with on offense, and you've got a new offensive coordinator coming from the Rams, and is this a team that was sort of a fringe-ish playoff team that all of a sudden now is going to elevate? And remember, they beat the Chargers despite all that stuff I just talked about. They beat the Chargers, and they played the Chiefs relatively tough in the play. I look at them as a team that they very well could be a 12-13 win team. And we could be talking about them the way we talk about the Bills and the Ravens and the Chiefs. I don't think they're far off from that. So that'd be one team that I don't think's gotten a lot of attention. And I know it's kind of cheating because like they were in the playoffs the last 2 years, but like as far as a team that could elevate onto that level, and there aren't that many of them in the NFL, they're one that I see like they absolutely could get there.
Albert, have a great rest of your week, man. We'll talk to you next week, and if you're getting to town, let me know.